Very excited to have Philip joining from London. And Philip, thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you, Christopher. It's nice to be here. Thanks.
So I know it's been a hectic couple of months for several reasons, and we'll get back to that. But just to recap, what was the reason you ended up founding a shipping company and ended up in the shipping and gas industry? Was it by accident or careful design?
Excellent question. And a question I actually ask myself, and have been asking myself for the last 10, 15 years, 20 years probably. And I haven't really got to the bottom of how it happened, but I'll give some background. So I'm born and brought up west of Bergen, Bergen in Norway, an island called Sotra, where there is a lot of maritime presence. Clearly now there's a lot of oil and gas out there. You've got the Sture oil terminal. You've got Kolsnes, the gas terminal, which of course supplies a lot of the gas that Europe uses. But when I grew up, there was more I would say, shipping presence. I had in my family, I had certain people who'd been working at sea as mariners, etc. So it was always something that I was drawn towards to some extent. Then as I finished school, as you do in Norway, you have to do, or you're supposed to do your 1 year of military service. I decided maybe not just to do that the regular route. So I wanted to do something within the Navy, Coast Guard, etc. So I ended up doing a nautical degree, which basically gave me a mate's license to be to work on large ships in international trade. And as part of that, I ended up in the Royal Norwegian Coast Guard as an officer. Having finished that, I always knew that it wasn't really for me to be a mariner full time or as a career as a mariner, but I was always fascinated about the ins and outs of the commercial life within ship owning companies, the fact that it was international, multicultural, dealing with Asia, dealing with the US, etc., etc. So I was drawn towards business at that point in time. I ended up going to Hoegh in Bergen, the leading business school in Norway. Got a degree there, and then applied for a job at Hoegh LNG in Oslo. Hoegh LNG being one of the leading LNG ship owners globally, and the leading one in Norway. So I started to work there in 2002, and then as we sort of progressed, I was there for 4 years. I saw an opportunity to do something different, to capitalize on the LNG commercial experience I'd gained, but also at that point in time in 2006, the capital markets were wide open for new concepts, new ideas to get them funded. So me and co-founders Jostein and Trym Tveitnes, we came up with the idea and the concept of founding Flex LNG, which at that point in time was about floating LNG production. And then to cut a long story short, one thing leads to another. And just in short, when you found a company, you need to be a bit naive. Not naive in a negative sense, but if you at that point in time are aware of all the challenges you are going to face, you would never do it, because no rational person will ever want to inflict such an amount of emotional pain on yourself. So you need to be a bit naive, take 1 month at a time, set yourself near-term targets, achieve those, and then sort of keep moving on. And that's essentially how Flex LNG was born, in the sense, we set out with an idea, a concept, we managed to get it funded, managed to get it listed, and of course, then the global financial crisis happened. We had to rejig the company, refocus the company on not necessarily doing floating LNG production, but going down the ship owner route, the more traditional ship LNG shipping, which is of course the Flex LNG that you see today, which is listed in Oslo. So all in all, you need a sense of, and you need a certain degree of madness, controlled madness, probably, to become an entrepreneur to found a company, as I'm sure a lot of your listeners will know, because as I say, if you would have foreseen and seen all the challenges that lie ahead, no rational person would do it.
No, it makes sense. So just reflecting on that experience, obviously today it's been one of the best performing stocks in the Oslo Stock Exchange, and of course many different reasons for that, of course. But you say when you start a company, you get some battle scars, you learn a ton of new things. And do you regret on some things, or is it just learnings you take on to the next company, or what are sort of the summary after that experience? And maybe that's also a segue to say, okay, you actually wanted to go again on a new company in the same industry, or
yeah, that's true. I wouldn't say there are regrets, because I'm not a person that, regrets really anything I've done. Sure, you look back and you say, do you know what? There were different ways to get to the same goal, or should have done things differently. I think regrets is a very negative way of looking at it. But for sure, I mean, there were lots and lots of key learnings that came out of having founded Flex LNG. One of those being we grew the company exceptionally quickly, from having founded it until we were probably 40, 50 employees. It took us 2 years maybe. Also, the way we went about building our presence within the market. I mean, LNG at that point in time was an established market, LNG ship owning, but of course the concept of floating LNG production was not. Although oil FPSOs, etc., had been a lot of oil and gas FPSOs had been around for decades. So there were a lot of learnings from that, and I kind of sort of told myself, I'm guessing in 2012, 2013, that the Flex LNG experience had been so intense that I sort of took the view that if I was ever going to start a company again, it would probably take many years. But then, of course, you lose yourself in new ideas. You lose yourself in people coming to you, speaking to you, picking up on trends in the industry, small tidbits here and there. And my brain sort of can collect information for years, and all of a sudden it manages sort of to put the jigsaw pieces together, or the Lego bits together. And that's really what happened. There came a natural time for me to leave Flex LNG. At that point in time, Fredriksen Group had taken control. I was in Singapore. There wasn't really a natural role for me there, because I wasn't really needed. And as a consequence, the decision was made to come back to the UK, because I was originally living in the UK before, when we founded Flex LNG. Come back to the UK, and at that point in time, I sort of spotted what I thought would become a very interesting trend, interesting thing to do over the next couple of years. I thought maybe 3 or 4 years. Here we are 9 years on. But and that was really about using a lot of the knowledge I had from the gas industry, because of course LNG is gas, but not apply it to shipping, but apply it to road transport. And people say, well, you're going from shipping to road transport. I mean, how do those link together? Well, there are actually quite a lot of similarities. You're dealing with large companies. A lot of our companies are large corporates today: DHL, Amazon, Royal Mail, etc. And you do the same in the LNG world, although there you're dealing with the Shells and the BPs of the world. So there are quite a lot of similarities. You're dealing with large international companies, and then of course, come to 2013, 2014, etc. There was a strong focus, or there was I would say strong focus, but there was an emerging focus of decarbonising, and how can you remove greenhouse gas emissions from your operations. So the idea was born to start focusing on decarbonising long haul or heavy trucks, if you want, here in the UK, and doing that not going down the biodiesel route or the hydrogen route or the battery electric route, but using a part of the world that I knew very well, which is gas, and biomethane, which is called biogas in the Nordics, but which is a renewable and sustainable gas is produced from waste feedstocks, whether that's sewage sludge or it's food waste, manures, etc., etc. So the idea was born then to set up a company, focus on building very large public access refueling stations here in the UK, and thereby convincing fleets they should move away from diesel over to running on 100% renewable fuel. Now, getting back to some comments I probably made 5 minutes ago about being slightly naive and always believing that things will take a lot shorter than they actually do. We founded the company in 2014, and me in my sort of with my naive rose-tinted glasses on, probably thought we would be where we are today 4, 5, 6 years on, and of course now we are soon 9.5 years down the road. So things always take a lot longer than you imagine. A lot more challenges along the road, and as I said, thankfully I don't know about all the challenges on day one, or you never do it.
Yeah, it's a couple of great points there. So is it correct to say that you and your CFO spent 2 years basically just working on the idea, talking to people, trying to convince them? Because I don't know if it's a common lesson in entrepreneurship, but usually it's not only enough to have a better solutions. They need to be incentivized to act upon it, and a lot of different pieces need to be together in order to, basically change, road transport and heavy trucks. So do you have any stories from the couple of first years that, explains all of this?
Yeah, I mean, so the first, couple of those. First of all, the just getting back to being an entrepreneur, and then I'll tell you a bit about trying to convince fleets that have been running perfectly good diesel trucks for 40 years why on earth they should move away from them. But as we came back from Singapore, my wife and I and our son, she was pretty keen for me just to have a normal job, as I call it a normal job, but just work in a large organization, get a regular paycheck, and basically have a family life around that was not filled with the ups and downs of being an entrepreneur. And we had a discussion about it, and for me it was like I just don't know what that life is like. I've lost touch with it. It's not me anymore. My DNA has now become sort of twisted in such a way, if you want, that the only way that I know now is to go out, do something on my own, create not on my own, but with a co-founder, but to do something and create something. But in doing so, you end up coming all the way back to scratch, because you do such simple things as, okay, you need a design student somewhere to design a logo. You need to get a website up and running. You need to get a bank account. All of these small things that take forever and a day and a lot of focus. And whilst you're doing that, you then also have to try and develop a concept, speak to potential customers, and get out there and really try and find out what is it the market wants? How can you fill that void, if you want? How can you satisfy that market demand? And I think when I look back, or when I now today look at, and by the way, I'm not going to rubbish people or companies who are trying to do hydrogen trucks and hydrogen as a fuel, or battery electric heavy trucks, etc. But a lot of those solutions today are companies saying, I know what the industry needs, I know what the industry wants, without necessarily asking the industry, do you really want these solutions? Do they work for you? Now, what we did was we spent probably a lot longer than we thought, which was really engaging with some of the leading fleets in the UK. And of course, this process was, as I say, a lot longer than I thought, where we would go in, we'd sit down with them and say, okay, if you want to decarbonize, if you want to move away from diesel, what solutions will work for you? Diesel is an amazing fuel. It's energy dense. You can fill it into a tank in a matter of 3 or 4 minutes, and you can drive 1,000 kilometers in a truck that has a full tank. So it is by far the best fuel out there today. if you want to run a very efficient operation. So one of the lessons for us was, don't go in and try to force a round peg into a square hole, or vice versa. Go out there and say, all right, if you're going to transition away from diesel, what do you need? And the answers were very clear. We need a truck that can do the same work as a diesel truck today, that can do it in the same time, that can carry, or that can pull the same weight. And yeah, the refueling experience needs to be pretty much as good as diesel. We took that on board. That fed into how we would design the stations, which today are the largest stations in Europe, potentially in the world, have a fill time, which is pretty much equivalent to diesel. And we worked actually with the truck manufacturers as well and said, guys, your design today can do this. Can you provide that in 2 or 3 years? So it was very much letting the market decide what it wanted, rather than us trying to come up with an amazing solution we thought was an amazing solution and then try to force that on the market. And out of that, I mean, I remember, speaking to, I won't mention names now because it wouldn't be fair, but a global logistics giant who in 2014, 15 told me, probably second half 14, so very, very soon after we founded the company, who said, it's great that you guys are focusing on decarbonising transport, but we believe in LNG. We believe that LNG is the truck fuel that is going to get us as the global logistics giant to where we need to be. And I said, okay, fair enough. We disagree with that, because whilst what we do is compressed natural gas, and then you have liquefied natural gas, the engine knows no different, because once it goes into the engine, it's become gas again. But of course, LNG is a bit more expensive. It's not as driver friendly, etc., etc. Getting into details here, but the reality was, they told us, you're going down the wrong path. We need to do LNG. I then, of course, knew that if you looked at the US, in North America, so US and Canada, a lot of truck fleets there around 2010, 2011, 2012 started out going down the LNG route, but they soon pivoted over to the CNG route. And of course, that's exactly what we've seen here in the UK in the last 5 years. Is fleets have pivoted away from LNG over to CNG because it's cheaper, it's more, it's greener, it's more driver friendly. It now gives you pretty much the same range, operational range, etc., etc. But once again, that was us saying, okay, you guys have decided that, but let's see if there are other similarities from around the world. And one of them, of course, was from North America, which is the leading country today that runs gas trucks. And there, of course, we'd seen exactly why that pivot had happened. And today we are in the midst of that exact same thing happening here in the UK.
Very interesting. So from my perspective, if you are going to be able to succeed with a fuel, I think you've said it yourself that it needs to be reliable, cost effective, and available at a big scale. So
yes,
of those 3 parts, where do you think people, underestimate, overestimate? Because there's so many solutions thrown out there. So how do you use that framework in order to decide? You touch upon hydrogen, it's electric, of course. There's so many solutions out there. And how should, hopefully rational people think about this puzzle?
So if we take one assumption here, which you can apply across all, which is, if you are serious about greenhouse gas emission reduction, then you can achieve 100% greenhouse gas emission reduction by running on electric, by hydrogen, or by running on biomethane, or indeed by running on a high blend superior biodiesel. Okay, so let's sort of set that aside and say there isn't really a big difference in that. So then it really comes down to saying, all right, what a lot of people don't fully grasp is that the logistics industry operates on very tight margins. A typical profit margin for a truck operator in the UK, a large fleet operator in the UK, is between 3 to 5%. All right. So that does not give you a lot of leeway to adopt more expensive solutions if you're still going to compete with your competitors who, as of today, have not adopted those solutions. So what a lot of people miss here is they get so caught up in something that's shiny and new and something that politicians or policymakers have said we all need to adopt by 2035 or 2040 or 2045. But the problem here is that there is no solution out there today for hydrogen or battery electric which does not increase your overall haulage cost by anything from 50% to potentially several 100%. Now that just doesn't work. We work closely with probably 80%-ish, so 80 out of the 100 largest fleets in the UK. Either they're existing customers, they're going to be customers, or they're busy doing trials, etc., etc. The insights we get from them, we believe, are unique because they sit down with us on a one-on-one basis and give us a bit of a sneak peek behind the curtain as to how they think, how they run their operations. And at the end of the day, as much as we would like to think differently, nobody can or will go green if they lose money compared to where they are today. Sure, you will get large fleets that say we're taking 10 trucks, hydrogen trucks, battery electric trucks on as a trial. Sure, but a lot of that is for R&D purposes. A lot of that is to, and they might be operating 3,000 trucks, right? So it gets lost in the grand scheme of things. But you're not seeing them ordering 300 trucks or 500 trucks or 1,000 trucks because they just can't. The economics aren't there today. So at the end of the day, it really comes down to what for me is so simple and so fundamental and basic, which is economics. And that's where I feel, unfortunately, there is a lack of realistic analysis. There's always talk about how batteries are going to get cheaper, how batteries are going to get lighter, how they're going to get better energy efficiency, how the hydrogen supply chain will get cheaper, how hydrogen trucks will get cheaper. Sure, that may or may not happen. It probably will happen at some point in time. But fleets today don't care about what's coming in 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. What they care about is they've got contracts they need to fulfill, they've got profit margins that they need to hit, and they just cannot take on board solutions that may or may not be mature 5, 10, 20 years from now. When they are mature, because they change their trucks every 5 years on average, right? Not all of them, of course, but in gradual batches. So if they bet on one technology today, which is biomethane trucks, that doesn't mean that they're necessarily wedded to that for 20 years or 30 years. If some amazing, groundbreaking technology comes here in 5 or 10 or 15 years, sure, they can pivot. And I think that's one of the keys here. It's about economics. It's about getting down to the bare bones of running a company, which a lot of policymakers don't really get. It's because you've got contracts to deliver on, and you need to make sure that you have a healthy profit margin so that you can actually pay your staff, etc.
That's a very reasonable point. So if we look at the roadmap, can you explain to us where do you see ReFuels today? You just went on the stock exchange. I guess there's a couple of interesting reasons for that. One is, of course, access to capital, and it seems like you have a plan to go further down the supply chain or do a bit of strategic decisions. But so why is the timing right now, and what is hopefully the consequences looking 2, 5 years or maybe 10 years into the future?
So I'm sure we all are aware that the capital markets in the last 18 months have not been great, right? The amount of IPOs that have happened have been pathetic. It's been a handful of them, pretty much. And we've had very volatile markets. So we often get the question, why on earth would you list when the IPO markets aren't great? And the answer there is, we can only control what we can control. We clearly can't control how the global equity markets and global financial markets are. The company now has reached a stage where we are growing so rapidly. We've got so much good stuff happening ahead of us. We've got strategic options that we would like to explore. when I say strategic options, doesn't mean selling the company, by the way, because that's often, lingo for that. But, there might be M&A stuff we can do in the future, et cetera, et cetera. All of that requires us to take a step up and have a company structure that gives us easier access to capital than we've had as being a private company. And we require growth capital at a quantum that we didn't have access to before. So we there had two options. One was to go down a private equity route, where we would, do a deal with a private equity firm and stay private. For a number of reasons, we chose not to do that. And then you're only left with basically one option, and that is to list the company. Now, the markets aren't great, for sure, or haven't been great. And when we went onto the stock exchange in May, they weren't fantastic either. But that's fine. We're long-term, I'm a large shareholder, so is my co-founder, et cetera, et cetera. So we're not going anywhere anytime soon. So we've done all of the legwork to get all the documentation done, get all the audits done, et cetera, et cetera. And then it was a question, all right, do we just bin all of that and wait another year until the markets are better, with no guarantees they'll be better in a year's time or in 6 months? Or do we get the company listed? Sure, we didn't raise a lot of money. We were basically minimum listing, where we raised the vast majority from existing shareholders. So, of course, we didn't get a lot of new capital coming in. But then we are at least listed. We can raise our profile. We can work on marketing the company. And then when the markets do improve and do open up a bit more, we can then raise additional capital to then start to take the company a step further from where we are today. So, from our perspective, why list? There are, I've listed a company before. There are pros and cons with being private, and there are pros and cons with being public. But for us, the pros here, outweigh the cons, because we just announced today that we grew close to 80%, July last year to July this year. We've been guiding that we will see similar growth rates going forward, whether it's 70%, 80%, 60%, 90%, but it's going to be in that range going forward. And that type of growth rate gives us a lot of opportunities, not just here in the UK, but also abroad. So therefore, getting the company listed, although the markets have not been great, it is what it is. We need to focus on what we can control. And I think over time, shareholders will appreciate that. And yeah, as I say, us as founders, we're not going anywhere. We're locked up, and so on and so forth. So now it was just really about getting a platform and getting a stage set, so that we can then take this company in a direction and at a speed in the future that it deserves.
Why listed in Oslo? Is that the only option, or are there other options?
No, there are other options. We looked at the UK, we looked at Netherlands, and we looked at Oslo. So those are basically three options for us. A couple of reasons why we ended up in Oslo. It's an energy-heavy stock exchange, so there's quite a lot of knowledge around energy. Quite a bit of green investments, renewable investments have been listed there. Not all of those have necessarily done well, but there is a fairly good understanding around renewable investments. And the Euronext growth market does offer an efficient way of getting listed. So to give an example, if we were to list here in the UK, from you submit an application to the stock exchange over here, it's probably a 3 to 4 month process. From you submit an application for Euronext growth, it's 15 working days. Now, there's a lot of work that goes on before those 15 days start, but that you have such a fairly short window is important when you've got markets that are fairly volatile, because the world could be upside down in 3 months. There's a less risk that it's upside down in 15 years. So a number of reasons there. I think from us, capital markets are international now. We have investors here in the UK. There's nothing preventing institutions in the UK, in Europe, in the US from owning stocks in Norway, in the UK, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, a number of reasons, and yeah, so far we've been been very happy about our presence, although it's only 3 months in now since we got listed.
Yeah. So obviously it's a huge momentum behind renewables, whether it's energy or other solutions. So if you take the typical investor who maybe tunes into this podcast, and that investor is trying to decide which companies he wants to put in his basket, obviously there are some sectors right now killing it big time, and there's a lot of different projects. Do you think this is the case of, running the numbers and seeing that it's actually profitable in the near term versus some projects who either do carbon capture or a lot of different high-tech solutions where it's not really understandable how they're going to make money today, but hopefully they will figure it out in a couple of years? How do you sort of see the environment in general, and what can a typical investor use as frameworks or methods to dive into different companies? Because it's it will become a big industry, this whole sector, I guess.
Yeah, it will. So one of the lessons learned from my Flex LNG days was that, I told my business partner for CNG Fuels, Baden, our CFO, that, I would never list a company again. And of course, I had to eat my words there because we have listed again. The reason I said that was early stage companies that have a concept, an idea, that are still years away from having tangible infrastructure built or tangible cash flows, etc., is not something I ever wanted to have listed again. Because Flex LNG, of course, were a concept. It took us years to get something built, etc. And in that interim, you're quite vulnerable, because if the capital market's shut, then the first things that investors run away from is the stuff that has no cash flow and will produce something attractive in the future. So we took a different tack this time, which was, let's keep our head below the radar. Let's build a concept. Let's build a company. Let's build something that is real, tangible, has tangible cash flow, tangible revenue, etc. And then, if we were ever going to list, we were going to list something that was mature. Now we are now a 9.5-year-old company. So, I shouldn't be giving advice to personal investors out there, but at least one of the lessons I've learned, and which is important to me, is being a public company is of course about delivering, all right? And I get that, all right? Yeah, you need to deliver updates, etc. But it's also about not having 6 years until something will be realized and something great will happen, may or may not happen, because so much can happen in that 6 years that is at least for me, sure, you can have certain themes that are very popular and therefore shoot up in value, but I don't necessarily think they're shooting up in value because there is substance behind it. I think there are just themes that investors get hooked onto, like AI today, all right? The AI craze that's currently going on is a bit like .com, and a bit like some of the green companies that did list 2 years ago, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, are today struggling because they've been in the public, they've been a public company when they've been going through a lot of their early growth pains. We are through those growth pains. Now we are cash flow positive, and we continue to have strong growth ahead. So I would at least look at, if you're looking to invest in the green space or in energy transition, I would want to look for something that has substance and near-term substance, and not just something that is probably 3 or 5 or whoever knows how many years away it may or may not be, because so much can happen in that time.
Definitely. So just looking ahead on, future milestones, is one of the biggest ones the journey from 10, 11 fueling stations to 100? That is, of course, one. Is that one of the biggest ones, or are there other milestones you are excited about?
So we've got runaway growth here in the UK. At this point in time, we've got 12 stations operation. Now 12 stations doesn't sound like much. It sounds, people will think, oh, you 9-year-old company, you've only got 12 stations. Seriously? Well, what have you guys been doing? You've been on holiday most of the time, or what is it? Well, first of all, building infrastructure takes time. You have to negotiate with landowners. You need to get council approvals. You need to get connection agreements with gas pipeline operators, electricity operators. You need to get surveys done, environmental surveys, etc., etc. All of this takes a lot longer than a lot of people think, particularly maybe not in Scandinavia, where land ownership is a much easier process. But once you get out into Europe, dealing with land and dealing with land ownership can take you years to negotiate. So we've spent a lot of time doing that, which is why we are now ready to really crank up our construction of stations up to a run rate of 2 to 3 stations per quarter going forward. So in the UK, we're kind of sorted, if you want. All right, the UK will just continue to grow on its own, and it will just continue to increase in pace. I think that the two things ahead that are, to me at least, are very exciting is, one is we want to integrate upstream. So we want to start taking ownership positions in biomethane production or biogas production facilities. Today, all of the biogas that we use is contracted. We don't actually have ownership stakes in some of these facilities. And that's also one of the reasons we wanted to list, so that we can have access to capital to pursue that. So that's something to look out for. And there are some very interesting, we believe, very value accretive opportunities not that far ahead. And the second one is international expansion outside of the UK market. Now, we don't want to expand internationally just for the sake of expanding. It needs to make sense strategically. It needs to make sense, of course, financially as well. And it's taken us 9 years to get to where we are today. We wouldn't go into some kind of EU country and spend 9 years building the knowledge base we've got today. So there again, you're probably looking at joint ventures or acquisitions or something like that. That's also something that's on our radar, if you want, because what we're doing in the UK today is so well proven, it's become business as usual. We've got an amazing team now that gets these stations built. Our customers just see running CNG trucks on biomethane as business as usual. It's for them, it's exactly the same as running a diesel truck. All the sexiness around it, all the uncertainty around it has gone out the window. Now the only thing they're focused on is, okay, Philip, when are you guys going to open more stations? Because currently we are constrained by the amount of trucks that we can operate, because you, Philip, ReFuels, you haven't got more stations in operation. So we ourselves now are holding back our own growth. And I think going forward, that's the key focus in the UK, is to get more stations built so that we can unlock even further growth. I mean, that sounds a bit sort of like we're not content, because as I say, we're growing 80% per annum, but we could do so much more if we had more stations.
Definitely. So just looking at it from my perspective, I think the demand side seems pretty obvious. People need to decarbonize. Companies need a solution that is ready today. That solution is there. But if you go to, let's call it supply side for the easiness of it, what can stop the supply? Where is the biomethane capped, sort of, in like a global context in transportation? Is that a clear answer today, or don't we really know yet?
Really, really good question. Thank you for that one. So, all right. Biomethane, biogas, is produced from waste feedstocks. So that means the easiest way to explain it is, for those of your listeners who know how a compost pile works, anything organic that you would throw onto a compost pile, and also organic stuff you wouldn't throw on there, like sewage sludge, right? But anything organic that decomposes can be used to produce biomethane and biogas. Across Europe today, there is not a shortage of feedstock, meaning there is not a shortage of waste material that can be fed into biogas facilities. On the contrary, there is still lots of organics that go to landfill. There's lots of organics that gets thrown, that gets dumped, that doesn't get collected. And so Europe is not short of feedstock at all. If you look at biodiesel, bioethanol, etc., there is a shortage of waste feedstocks that are genuine, renewable, and sustainable. That is not the case for biomethane, which is why the scalability of biomethane is so great. If you look at production capacity then, as of today, there is more biomethane wanting to go into transport demand than there is actual transport demand. So that's also a good place. But then you have to notice that was today. In 3 or 4 years' time, there will be a shortage if not more capacity is built. But that is actually where we are in Europe. We're in a very good position because there is now very strong push from the EU, UK, Nordics, etc., to get a lot more biogas facilities built. One of the outcomes of the Ukraine war, the energy crisis, the fact that Russia turned off the gas taps, etc., has been that there's a strong focus within the EU to try to control its own destiny and try to produce as much gas as it can as possible. And of course, you can't just, if you haven't got fossil gas reserves, you can't just drill and hope you're going to get it. So there is a strong focus on producing more renewable gas, which is biomethane. And the EU has an ambition over the next 8 to 10 years to 10x renewable gas production in the EU. Now, 10x is a huge number and massive growth going forward. So we do not see, at this point in time, we do not see a scenario where we are going to run out of renewable gas that we can source for our stations, even though we've got runaway growth downstream, which is why also our customers, our end users, our fleet operators see biomethane as a sustainable and a long-term solution because they are confident that there is going to be enough production also in the future, which is something they are not necessarily 100% sure is going to be the case with biodiesel.
I understand. So just a couple of fun questions to finish off the conversation. And I want to dive into the concept of entrepreneurship, which we started with, I think. But what do you think is the most underrated yet vital skill in order to take an idea, make the idea, and all the way up to a stock exchange or, a impactful company? Because that journey, like you said, can easily take 10 years, right?
Okay, I'll probably give you a couple there because there are so many. I've said you need to be a bit naive in the sense that there needs to be a degree of naivety and a bit of and also stamina, because this is not something that takes. There are very few companies, apart from tech companies, all right? If you come up with a fantastic app or do something in the AI space, there are very few companies that you can just take within 6 months, 2 years, whatever it is, and list it, unless you've got a lot of money behind you already and you go out and buy something. So you need a bit of naivety. You need a lot of stamina. I would also say, knowing what I know now, make sure that you get some great advisors around you. They don't necessarily need to be on your board. They don't need to be investors. But have someone you can call up, a bit of a mentor. You can call up, bounce ideas off. If you've had a bad day, a bad week, a bad month, get a bit of moral support, because it can be tough. I wouldn't say it's lonely, but clearly you need to have someone who you can open up to and actually, get a bit of feedback from. And as I say, it doesn't need to be on your board, because you might have people on your board of directors who are more there in a professional capacity. This is someone who you can really open up to and can give you some guidance. Third one is, if you're in a stage of life where you're married, got a long-term partner, etc., make sure they're supportive. If not, forget it. I mean, just don't even bother going down that route. You need someone, and you need to be dead open about this on day one. I've been married now since 2009. We've been together since 2005, and one of the first things I told her was, I think I'm going to become an entrepreneur, and I met her in Oslo. She's Norwegian. I think I'm going to become an entrepreneur, and I'm going to move to the UK. And of course, that was important. Set the scene for where we are today. So yeah, make sure that you tick that box. And finally, I would just say as well, sometimes don't take life too seriously, because when you're in the middle of something and it doesn't go to plan, you think your entire world is crumbling around you. Absolutely not. Get a bit of distance to it. Shut down your laptop, go for a walk, do something different, go to the gym, see some friends, go back, and you will see that what you thought was the solution that you could never sort out has lots of different angles to it. And actually, when you've probably found the right solution to it, you're probably going to find that, what a schmuck you were that didn't see that in the first place. So, just take your time. Don't try to rush too much, because that's one of the key learnings I at least had from Flex LNG was, I wanted there to be 28 hours in a day. I wanted things that would usually take a month to happen in 3 days. Now I feel much better about myself when I now actually realize that, stuff that should take a month, you can maybe compress it to 3 weeks, but for 3 days, forget it. All right. Be a bit realistic about your timelines as well, and don't be so hard on yourself.
That's great advice. Just another question. Does location matters? Because we're both from small communities, and you ended up in London, you went to Singapore. I'm in Oslo right now. How important is the location in terms of what you want to build or what industry you want to work for? Is there a value there to try to go to a hub, or at least experience the hub and learn from the hub, and then eventually go back if you need to, of course?
I think there is, for sure, because of course there are. I now post-COVID, working from home, working remotely, digital nomads, etc. Right? Theoretically, you can do anything from anywhere, but you do need to bounce off energy, I'd say. All right, you need to bounce off brilliant minds. You need to bounce off people who are doing what you're trying to do, or who have or have at least done something similar. And of course, when you're from a fairly small place, you're not necessarily going to find them there. So yeah, I would say that's very important. I think I'd also like to say that coming from a small place can also be an advantage, because a lot of people I know who've done well in business or have done well in something else aren't born and brought up in a big place. And that might be coincidence that people from small places get attracted to other people from small places, all right? So it might be a pretty bad data sample I've got here, that I come from a small place and hence we interact better. But I think there's a thing to be said for, and I'm sure there's some people who've done cultural studies here, but if you're in a big environment, you might be maybe quite settled. You might not feel the same drive for going out, trying to do something different, appreciating different angles, being as open to accepting input, which is very different to where you've come from. Because if you live in a big place, that's your day-to-day life. So therefore, you might have developed, I wouldn't say short-circuited, but developed slight insensitives for picking up nuances, picking up ideas, because that's where you've come from. But if you come from a much smaller place, everything in a big place is in a hub is new to you, is different, and there might be something there that you're actually then more susceptible to picking up on stuff. Once again, my data points here are very, 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 very few and far between, but there might be something there as well, that it's not always an advantage necessarily to come from a city or a large place.
No, it's a very interesting topic indeed. Philip, thank you so much for taking the time. I hope we can do it again in the future, and good luck with all the developments going forward as well.
Thank you so much, Christopher. It's been lovely talking to you.